Hello YouTube. Pets. Animals that we keep with us to keep us company and shower in love. Most people, they love their pets more than they love most humans, and I would be lying if I said that I didn't love my girlfriend's cats a whole lot. I mean, they're adorable. But then I wondered, what about Tamriel? What kind of pets do the people of Tamriel have to keep them company? Now that question I aim to answer in this video, after the intro. So, pets. Now, before we begin, I need to lay a few ground rules. First of all, I will only really be talking about the pets that people keep in their home for company, so no mounts or livestock. Second, I will be talking about the most relevant pets for certain regions or cultures. I say that because in the Elder Scrolls universe, almost every creature has been kept as a pet by some idiot at some point. I mean, one of the most common quest tropes in nearly every Elder Scrolls game is local idiot kept dangerous animal as a pet, now it killed someone or even killed the owner, and player needs to solve that situation. While those stories are hilarious and often some of my favorite quests, they aren't really culturally relevant pets. Alright? Alright. Now, that having been said, just like in our own universe, dogs and cats are very popular. Tamriel has numerous dog breeds that fulfill a variety of roles to Tamriel's inhabitants, from tracker dogs and rescue dogs, to even guard dogs and just, dogs for companionship and hugs. Like I said, there are numerous breeds like terriers and retrievers, and even some Tamriel exclusive magical ones like deathhounds. In fact, there are so many dog breeds on Tamriel that it would fill probably 50% of this video if I talked about all of them, so I'll leave dogs mostly for their own video someday. But what's interesting, however, is that it seems that dogs as pets are most commonly found in central and western Tamriel, with them being most prevalent in the human and elvish provinces, but them being a bit rarer in Morrowind and Valenwood and nearly non-existent as far as I could tell in Elsewhere and Blackmarsh, with the Khajiit and Argonians apparently not being super big fans of dogs. Now, in terms of cats are, at least in lore, extremely common pets on Tamriel, both for cuddles, but also for mouse and rat hunting around the house. There are, just like with dogs, a lot of different cat breeds on Tamriel, most of which are based on real-life cat breeds. Now, just like some dog breeds who will one day get their own video, some breeds of cats are actually quite culturally significant. For example, the ancient Yokudans and some modern-day Redguards believe that a breed of hairless sphinx cat are blessed by their god Tuwaka, and they are believed to sometimes be able to guide humans to the afterlife. In some sects of Redguard culture, they even hold such a significance that we can find golden cat statues where particularly honored cats were buried, and some even mummified, which is some pretty cool lore. Now, interestingly enough, while Khajiit don't really seem to keep dogs, they do keep cats, both as rodent hunters and for companionship, which is funny and a little weird at the same time, considering that, Khajiit are humanoid cats. But not just that, because Khajiit also often keep animals like certain breeds of big cats, like tigers and sentia tigers, as pets, with especially the cubs of these breeds being seemingly popular among the Khajiit. Now, what's actually quite funny is that one of the types of Khajiit that we find in the Elder Scrolls universe, the Alfiq Khajiit, is as small and kinda looks like a house cat. In fact, if they didn't wear clothes and jewelry, most of the people in Tamriel would think that the Alfiq are house cats, and often they do think they're house cats, which is why the Alfiq don't really like traveling outside of Elsewhere. That being said, they are not above using this quality of looking like a house cat for nefarious purposes, with Alfiq sometimes pretending to be house cats to steal stuff from people or outright blending in with house cats during times of war in order to spy on the other races and armies. Which is probably why in lore it would mean that in times of war people would probably be suspicious against cats, because even if they're not at war with a Khajiiti faction, I imagine that Alfiq mercenaries probably exist who would gladly spy on your enemies for some coin. That would be pretty interesting to see in a game at some point. That having been said, it's not only the Khajiit who tend to keep the big cats as pets, as in the lore, southern and western Skyrim is also said to be filled with lynxes, with quite a few Nords being able to tame them, and specifically sell them to the Nord aristocracy like Jarls and lower nobles, who then love to keep these lynxes as pets and part of their households. With a similar thing apparently happening in some orc cultures with these lynxes, which is quite interesting. In fact, the Nords in the lore have also been able to keep some wolves as pets and tame them, with tamed wolves apparently being quite common for companions for hunters, for example. Now, to stay in northern Tamriel, we also know that people living near the northern coast will sometimes keep Chubloon, a penguin-like creature based on our world's great auk, as a pet in their household, as these creatures are quite docile, and if you feed them, they are known to actually follow you and just waddle around your house with glee to keep you company. And we know that, at least in Skyrim, goats are quite popular as pets, although there we are already going into livestock territory, but there are some people who will just keep them, as pets for fun and for cuddles, so keep that in mind. Now, next let's head to the Summerset Isles, where their usual pet catalog, other than cats and dogs, includes some pretty fun creatures. First of all, the Eleanor ringtail, an animal which kinda looks to be a mixture between a ringtail lemur and a raccoon, and like a squirrel, has cheek pouches to keep food in, which is pretty cute. Now, they're pretty common in the wilds around Summerset Isles, and it's said that they're often kept as pets. That having been said, their most popular pet, at least among nobles, and the pet that gives the most status in the Summerset Isles, seems to be having a fledgling griffin. Young griffins who, at least for a while before they grow up, as when they grow up griffins become ferocious and nearly uncontrollable creatures, are pretty popular pets. Now, young griffin fledglings are actually quite popular and give a lot of status if you have them as a pet, and it seems to be that only the very rich people and the nobility of the Summerset Isles can afford a fledgling griffin as their pet, and only then they won't even be able to have them for a super long time, because eventually they will grow up. Now, what's interesting here is that wild griffins are nearly untamable, so almost all fledgling griffins that are kept as pets are most likely the young of already tamed griffins, which the High Elves use for beasts of war, with those pets who grow up likely transitioning to be used as beasts of war once they become too big and too unruly to serve as household pets. But the fact that a creature is unruly or difficult does not stop the people of Tamriel from keeping them as pets. For example, we know that both skeevers and mudcrabs have been kept as pets by some regular Tamrielic people over the years, and we know that some common pets, at least in the lore, are bunnies and hares in the regions filled with plains and light forests, foxes in more wooded regions, rats and mouses seemingly almost everywhere, and meanwhile in the desert regions like the Alakir Desert of Hammerfell and the deserts of elsewhere, people have kept scorpions and dung beetles as their pets. And all over Tamriel, people have kept a variety of birds which are native to the region as pets. For example, we know that both magpies, parrots and different types of owls and plovers have been kept as pets, and even some birds of prey like falcons serve as pets, which some people even train, with falconeering being an actual thing on Tamriel, which is really cool. Oh, and fish are very popular as well. While the people of Tamriel don't really have small fish bowls, we know that primitive aquariums exist, likely primarily in the households of rich nobles, and fish ponds in gardens also are a thing. Now, specifically in the tropical and warm coastal regions of Tamriel, it's actually quite common to see people with monkeys as pets, apparently usually caught locally. And in tropical coastal regions, people will often keep crabs as pets, which is pretty cool. And as you can see, a lot of pets are kind of region bound, like if a certain animal is native to a certain region, it's more likely to be kept as a pet there. Because for example, in Hammerfell, there are some peculiar pets that some of the Redguards keep. For example, they keep a variety of lizard pets, from geckos to skink lizards, even racing them for fun in the desert, which is just amazing. I mean, take a look. Absolutely grand. I'm so happy to be able to use that bit of footage again. Anyway, the Redguards are also the ones to primarily keep fennec foxes and jackals as pets, which all live in the Hammerfell steppes, where they are most likely captured to serve as pets for the Redguard households. Now, that having been said, now it's time to get right out weird with the Bosmer or the Wood Elves. Now, the Wood Elves have some cutesy, small fluffy animals like prairie dogs and fishers, which is a kind of ferret, which they keep as pets. But some Bosmer are also known to keep weirder creatures as pets. Specifically, they are known to domesticate and keep some types of colorful moths as pets, and they even keep horvors as pets, which are large, oversized, tick-like creatures that we talked about in the bugs video, which I find absolutely disgusting creatures, as they kind of like suck the blood out of corpses, and I hate them. But some Bosmer do keep them as pets, which I don't understand why, but sure. But the Bosmer aren't the only ones to keep bug and insect creatures that we've talked about before on the channel as pets, as the Dark Elves of Morrowind have quite a few weird pets, like the Nyx Hound, which is essentially their replacement for dogs in Morrowind, except that they are now creepy insect creatures. They're also known to keep Quama scribs, which are young Quama before they grow up. Actually, something very funny is that the scrib, along with rats and pack rats, were actually the first ever pets introduced to be obtainable by the player in any Elder Scrolls game in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind's Tribunal DLC, which is really cool. Now, the Dunmer are also known to keep ash hoppers as pets and shulks and mushroom shulks as pets, all of which I talked about in detail in my video on the bugs and insects of Tamriel. So if you want to know more about any of these insects and want to know some more in-depth lore, watch that video. But probably my favorite of these bunch of insect pets is the shroom shulk. They are pretty large insects with mushrooms growing on their backs, which in some cases produce calming spores, which is why some Dunmer really like having them around the house, as they scatter these calming spores around the house. So that's pretty funny. Now, that having been said, the Dunmer also have some non-insect pets. For example, there's the favorite of many Elder Scrolls Online players, the Bantam Gwar, a creature that, despite the name, is not actually related to the regular Morrowind Gwar. Rather, they are a bit like Morrowind's chickens, as they are bred for meat and eggs and just waddle around a bit. Due to their cuteness, people really seem to like them, and in real life as well, because there are several Bantam Gwar plushies, but also in Morrowind itself it's a pretty popular pet. Now, some other creatures that the people of Morrowind tend to keep as pets are scuttlers, which are small reptiles, kind of being Morrowind's house cat substitutes, and some smaller variants of regular gwars, which are usually kept as beasts of burden by the Dunmer, but in some cases also as family pets. But my outright favorite pet from Morrowind is the so-called Vardvark, a creature which seemingly smells pretty bad and vaguely looks like an anteater and an armadillo combined. Now, the reason why it's my favorite and why this creature is definitely getting its own video someday is that this creature's very existence is the result of a failed experiment of a crazy Tilvani mage. You see, this mage tried to create an amazing and hideous monster to be serving as a beast of war, but he stopped his experiments when the Vardvar came to being as a sort of mid-stage in his experiment. He was disgusted by the creature and wanted to destroy it, but then his daughter thought that the Vardvark was cute and he allowed her to keep the first one as a pet. But then his daughter thought that her pet Vardvark was lonely, so he needed a family, so, you know, she kinda asked her father to create more, and he did, and then they kept procreating and just kinda blended into Morrowind's nature, specifically Vvardenfell and Eastern Morrowind. And then when people discovered that this mage created these creatures, they were like, wow, that's a cute creature, please create more of them so we can actually populate nature with them. And then he did, and several different types of Vardvarks now populate Morrowind's grazeland and hills, which is pretty funny, and people started keeping them as pets as everyone just thinks that they're super cute. A happy accident, so to say. That having been said, something to keep in mind here is that creatures like the Bantam Gwar and the Vardvark, while commonly kept in Morrowind as pets, can be found in other places as well, which goes for much of the creatures on this list, as sometimes pets are straight up imported and exported throughout Tamriel. A good example of this is the Fell Runner, with some colorful variants of this Fell Runner, which is a flightless desert bird from Hammerfell. They got imported to northwestern Tamriel, so the more humid regions of Hammerfell and High Rock, as, you know, popular pets in households for a few years, despite them not even living there. It was actually because some royal suddenly started keeping them as pets, which then made it popular among the population. But keep that in mind, because while, for example, the Imperials have very little pets exclusive to them, for example, Cyrodiil is known to import pets from all other places, especially rich families, so many of the pets on this list, even if they are only native to a specific region, may still be found in Cyrodiil and other parts of Tamriel if there's someone rich and enthusiastic enough to get them imported. Now, another region that has some very interesting pets is Black Marsh, which, like Morrowind, has quite an array of different pets compared to the rest of Tamriel, with the most normal one being the regular wombat, which is apparently a thing as a pet in some parts of Black Marsh, and probably the weirdest thing being the so-called wolf lizard, along with more types of regular animals spliced with lizards. Now, these pretty weird creatures are all lizards that are shaped by the Hist in the shape of other animals to serve the Argonians in different roles, such as the role of travel mount and beast of burden, but some, like the wolf lizard, are actually being kept as pets, which is weird, but also pretty cool. Now, other than these spliced creatures that the Argonians have, they also keep sap adders, ancestor lizards, dragon frogs and hermit crabs as pets. Although those last two are mostly kept to just eat as snacks at some point, it seems. Casually just eating your pets. I mean, that's okay. I wouldn't do that to my girlfriend's cats, but you do you, Argonians. Now, the ancestor lizard that I mentioned in that list is actually a pretty interesting case, as according to some, this lizard, which is described as a pretty popular and low-maintenance pet, according to some legends is actually the original species of lizard, which the Hist took and then transformed them into the Argonians. And if that's true, the Argonians literally keep their genetic ancestors as pets, which is pretty interesting. Now, a final creature which sometimes serves as a pet, which originates from Black Marsh, is the so-called bog dog. Strange dog-like creatures with green camouflage on their backs, native to the marshes. And we don't know a whole lot about them, but they certainly do look interesting and they are said to be pretty popular as pets. Now, there are a few creatures which I haven't mentioned so far, like the jerboa, a small rodent which kinda looks like an adorable cross between a bunny and a squirrel and a rat, which is native to elsewhere and is often kept as a pet by the locals, although apparently these are real-life creatures, which is something that I only just discovered as I'm finishing this video, which is pretty sick. Now, another real-life creature found as a popular pet in the Elder Scrolls universe, specifically in Elsewhere and parts of southern Cyrodiil, is the so-called cavy, which is actually a pretty cute creature. Oh, and don't forget sloths. Sloths don't really seem to be native to Tamriel, but they are native to some of the islands south of Tamriel, primarily Solstice, which was added in the latest Elder Scrolls Online DLC. And in Solstice, some people are absolutely obsessed with these creatures, with some schools even checking children's bags to see whether they didn't secretly try to take their pet sloths with them. It's by far the most popular pets on the island, which is pretty cute. Now, another creature kept as a pet sometimes, this time by the orcs, are echelets, which are actually young echetaries, a creature found in the High Rock Mountains, which are kept by the orcs as beasts of burden and farm animals. They are pretty dangerous creatures, but their young ones are apparently sometimes kept as pets before they grow up. Cool. Now, the very final mention before moving up to some of the final weird stuff is the so-called Jugat. We have no idea what kind of creature this is, but apparently it was a popular pet creature with nobles in Cyrodiil, as Emperor Uriel Septim VII apparently had one as a kid, but once again we just don't know anything about this creature. Alright, now let's get to some of the really weird stuff for the end of the video. First of all, giant spiders, you know, frostbite spiders and the like. A lot of shady people tend to keep these creatures as pets on Tamriel, specifically often using them to tap their venom and use it as poison on their weapons, which, I mean, it's a logical reason to keep a spider, but as someone terrified of spiders, I mean, I wouldn't. But also, both goblins and ogres are actually known to keep pets. For example, goblins keep durzogs as pets, which are really aggressive, skilled dog-like creatures, and ogres are known to straight up keep bears as their pets. They even play fetch with them, which is pretty hilarious. That said, the Sloth of Thras, the slug-like creatures living west of Tamriel, are also known to keep pets, specifically undead pets in the form of dead sea creatures, which these necromancer slugs straight up reanimate to serve as their pets, which is pretty disgusting but also pretty interesting. And to stay outside of Tamriel, the Marmor or the Sea Elves are actually known to keep these creatures, reef vipers, as their pets, which are winged serpents from the continent of Piandene, which is pretty cool. Alright, and that seems to be almost all I can say about the common pets on Tamriel, but I do want to end this video by reminding you that these are definitely not the only pets. I mean, like I said, Weirdo having made a dangerous creature a pet and now it's a problem is a very common story on Tamriel. I mean, there's people who try to tame bears, which is apparently very common among nobles. But also cliff striders, guzzards, wamasus, you know, those wamasus, those immensely powerful creatures known as swamp dragons. What could go wrong? Oh, and someone also tried to domesticate worm mouths. What a great idea. Or giant snakes. What can go wrong? I mean, come on, there's a lot of idiots on Tamriel. But despite it being overused, these kind of quests are often my favorite, so I mean, it's cool. That being said, that's everything I can say about the pets of Tamriel today. And I sincerely hope that you learned something new about the Elder Scrolls universe and that you liked the video. And if you did, why not give the video a like and return for the next Elder Scrolls lore video that I make. Probably next week, but, you know, my life became so busy I couldn't even get this one out for, you know, World Animal Day a couple of days ago. I do what I can. I'm sorry, the video is late, but I hope you liked it anyway. And with that said, it's time to thank my top Patreon supporters: Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, King Chris 20, Steve G, Volker of Argonia, RB Dash, His Soul, Lexicon, Ranger, Komodo, Rakai, and Sorta Bushido. It's thanks to these people and all the others on screen, so my YouTube members and my Patreon subscribers, that this channel stays afloat, and for that I am very grateful. That said, I will see all of you in the next lore video. Bye bye.